Welcome to Leadership English. This is the perfect place for you as a professional who's a non-native speaker. My name is Tanya Suarez, and as your communication coach, I'm here to teach you how to speak clearly and confidently in English. In this special interview episode, you're going to see a conversation between myself and my client, Mishit Patel, as he shares with us his journey from startup founder to CTO of a tech company. Not only do we talk about his leadership communication evolution, but we're also going to talk about the culture shocks he experienced when moving here, as well as the communication culture shocks, as he had to figure out his identity and communication style in an American corporate environment. And remember, after you enjoy this interview, if you haven't already, go to tanyasuarez.com and download your free audio training of the 3 essentials of American leadership communication. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you go ahead and tell us about yourself, what you do, and where you're from?
Sure. So my name is Mishit Patel. I'm a CTO in a tech company. So currently I live in Atlanta, Georgia, but I grew up in India. I moved to United States back in 2008.
And tell us a little bit about your journey from startup founder to now CTO.
Oh, it's been quite a journey. I used to work as a senior software engineer in one of the telecommunication company. And back then, whole cloud technology was all around. It was completely new. I was hearing a lot about cloud technologies, just like, how we have been hearing about AI. And I met 2 guys, Andrew and Mike, and we decided to start up a smart security company. And fast forward, that startup from 3 people became 70 today.
Nice, very impressive. And so from being in the startup world, and especially being in that engineering mindset, and now being a CTO and really being in more leadership roles and actually leading teams, how was that for you in terms of communication? Because communicating as a leader is very different than when you're just like talking out, brainstorming ideas with your co-founders.
Absolutely. When I started a company, my focus was very narrowed, right? And over the period of time, I started thinking more as a leader. Especially, what I realized is, I need to give a proper direction to my team. They look at you as a leader. And if you don't know about the direction, if you don't set up the proper vision, then they are lost. So a couple of things I started doing for that is, one, educating myself. What are the latest trends, technologies, and how, I'm going to set out my company's vision around it. So, and then that kind of build my confidence as well. So keeping yourself up to date, with my domain was really important as a leader.
So something that I find that's interesting, even as a native speaker, being in rooms with more important people, it can be a little bit intimidating. And so you going from startup to now as a CTO, and you're in these amazing experiences and meetings and boardrooms, how has that impacted your confidence? Like, were you intimidated at first, or did it always feel natural?
Yeah, totally. When I started, I was very fearless. My focus was, let's just solve the problems on the customer side. And that I was doing really well. But as I started meeting with my investors and my customers, I realized, it's not only about technology and problems, right? You should be able to connect with people. And for that, I started realizing that I have some, cultural barriers or communication barriers, coming from the different background. And that started hitting my confidence pretty low. But one thing I did is, started listening more podcasts, listening more success stories from the people coming from the different cultural background, and replacing the negative thoughts with the positive thoughts. That has helped me go.
That's huge. And that's one of the reasons I like doing these interviews, because when other people hear your stories and they're like, maybe they're at that point where they're at that a little bit self-conscious or dealing with those confidence barriers, and they hear you and they're like, okay, it's going to get better. Somebody else did it. I think that's awesome. Another point with the leadership role, it's not only being in rooms and having to do more of the sales forward language, but you also now lead teams, and you actually lead global teams. So what is that like for you? Were there any growing pains with being able to, with the intercultural communication, like leading teams in different cities and different countries?
Oh, totally. We became a global company, and as a global leader, trying to understand, different cultures was challenging, but it is very important, for your geographically diversified teams. couple of things I did, based on my experience, one, you have to be very open about their culture, try to understand their communication style, their norms, their holidays, and that will help you to understand this is how they operate. And once you understand that, your communication becomes kind of much easier, right? Because otherwise you'll be keep setting the wrong expectations from them. So understanding how they operate was very important. So yeah, I mean, you have to respect their culture. A couple other things, which, I learned is be very clear in your communication. Don't use a lot of complicated words, a lot of complicated language. Be simple and be clear, right? And that was a huge, because that'll, same thing, they'll follow you. If you try to be very complicated, in your communication, they'll think this is how my leader is doing it. You and I need to impress them. Be simple, and they'll be very simple with you.
Yes, and I say that so much, and I think it's not until you're in it that you realize, especially for American corporate culture, the English, grammatically speaking, is really simple, and the communication is very direct. So I think a lot of times, I always say that non-native speakers know English a lot better than native speakers because you're just so much more into the grammar structure. And I think sometimes there's a confusion that to be eloquent, to be fluent, means to have more complex grammar structure. But what you're saying is perfect. Even on a global level, the more simplicity there is, the more clarity there is.
Yeah, totally. And especially for American culture, American corporate, right? This is very important because, as you can see, now the world has become remote first, right? You could hire the talent across the world, and it's to an advantage. You can recruit the best people out there in the technology. But if they are coming from the different background, this is something, even though you are a native, like American here, American, this is something very important I have realized for American corporate.
And you're also teaching your global teams the expectation of how to communicate. And so, which I think is kind of tricky because you as a non-native speaker, you yourself are adapting your communication. And then to realize that that's the example. For example, you and I have talked about how American culture is very much the triangle structure, right? Where you have to get to the message first, and that's the opposite for a lot of cultures. How has that been for you to adapt the way you process messaging to try to lead with the main point first?
Oh, yeah, totally. That was even kind of learning for me, come to the points directly, right? Think in terms of bullet points. That was a very, important learning for me. And I come from different background, and our communication style is a little different. And triangle approach was, it has really helped me.
I love that simplicity because even for me, sometimes I need to remind myself. And that's something that I like to remind people. Even though that's the general way that we communicate in American culture, it's not necessarily ingrained in everyone. There's still, when you're in that corporate setting, there is a level of awareness that you need to have something, which for me, in our case, is the triangle. It very visually reminds me whenever I start rambling of okay, no, get to the point. And you can use phrases like, to make a long story short, or to get to the main point. Just because you start off in a more flowery way doesn't mean you can't redirect.
Totally.
So with regards to your language journey, when did you learn English?
I mean, English has been always a part of my curriculum. So I started learning in a school, but growing up in India, we were not using it practically on day-to-day basis. So I was just, kind of learning English as a subject, as my curriculum, and nothing more than that, until I moved to United States, in 2008. That's when, I started immersing myself, in English. I started dreaming in English, probably a little bit.
That's a good sign.
That's like, okay, now I'm kind of getting into it. But yeah, it took, kind of a couple years of living and working here in the United States, to understand how I should be communicating in English and getting more comfortable.
Now, something interesting that I find for when you're speaking in another language, communicating clearly is obviously the priority, but I find that when you feel like yourself, when you can make jokes, if you're kind of a funny person, when you can express certain emotions, is when you really feel like the language is a part of you. So in your experience, because you had language, but it wasn't part of your speaking experience, but then when you moved here, was there a point that you felt like, oh, I feel like myself in English, or is that something that comes and goes for you?
Yeah, initially it was just like, comes and goes. I was just using as a transactional, just for my work. But, I started getting more into pop culture. Watching movies, concert was a huge thing back then. When I moved here, I liked a couple of bands, and then even kind of listening to radios kind of helped me. So yeah, that kind of helped me to okay, now I'm getting into there. But yes, initially I just thought I just know enough English to do some transactions.
Hmm. Actually, I'm glad you brought up pop culture because that's something that we've talked about a lot, that it can be, because communication goes so much further than vocabulary and verbs and structure. The cultural aspect, feeling, because you and I have talked about how when you moved here, not knowing some of the pop culture references, it can be kind of, whether, I don't know if intimidating is the right word or isolating, or how did you encourage yourself to still have those conversations, to still try to make friends here, even though you weren't familiar with pop culture?
True, and that has been pretty challenging as well. When my friends at my workspace, and we had a couple hiking groups, and even when I started my company, talking to my co-founders outside of work, all that has been challenging. As I said, earlier, I was just like, let me just focus on my work, and that's the English I have been using it. But yeah, over the period of time, I gained my confidence that, I can talk about things. There were a lot of interesting things. I loved NFL when I moved here. Some of my cousins, who've been living here for a while, they are into NFL, and I got into NFL. And then there was a topic, something to talk about outside of work. Now that
I have something.
Yeah. I had players to talk about, I had teams to talk about, I had scores to talk about. And so those kind of things helped me to keep me going.
Nice. And I think that that's important to realize for other people listening, that it's not about knowing everything. I find that what really helps, especially when you feel there's a disconnect with what other people are talking about, whether it's pop culture, or maybe you're with a group who really loves boating and you have no idea how to sail, or whatever the case might be, to lean into curiosity. If you don't know something, it's okay. You can listen and ask questions and still be a part of the conversation, even if you don't know it. Like, even for me as technically, I'm also a native speaker in Spanish, but I typically only speak Spanish with my family. So whenever I meet new people, I'll be honest, I struggle with the slang. And my family's Mexican. Expressions are very different in different Spanish-speaking countries. And sometimes I get a little overwhelmed of I don't know what that means. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or if they're talking about cultural things, and I'm first generation here in the US, I have a very different experience. I still do sometimes get really a little bit overwhelmed, and I have to remind myself, it's okay.
Yeah, totally.
Go with the flow.
I agree to your point about being curious, I mean, to be honest, until, we started talking and, I enrolled into this program, I always thought if something which I'm not aware of, it could be something related to pop culture, then it just diminished my confidence. I have nothing to add. I cannot participate in this conversation. If somebody is joking around about some movie which I have not watched, right? And I always thought, okay, what do I say? Versus, it's okay, be curious, ask question. Oh, can you explain me? And it's okay, that was a very key learning for me.
It's so liberating. I feel like it takes a ton of pressure off of oh, I don't have to know everything, but I can still connect with people.
Yeah, totally.
Good. That makes me so happy that it works. Okay, so going from language to culture, which are, of course, intertwined, but I'm very curious to hear about your experiences with American culture. We've talked about pop culture and conversation. Can you tell me some of your earlier memories of some culture shocks that you perhaps encountered when you first moved here?
Moving to US was pretty shocking, both good and, surprising. But yeah, that was quite a journey. I mean, I learned, with my different experiences. But one of the things, I realized interacting with Americans, especially, it's a pretty private culture. It's a pretty, people adore the freedom, I meant to say. They respect the personal life a lot here versus other cultures, which is great, in fact, right? I mean, I'll give you some example. People do a lot of things on their own. a lot of things are on their own, right? Especially I've seen, household chores, DIY projects, and that kind of encouraged me to do a lot of things on my own too.
Yeah, we love DIY.
Yeah, like versus in my culture in India, you have somebody, you just make a call, so like a painting a door, fixing your blinds and all that. I was like, let me call somebody. No, it's just it's a lot of independence. People just do it by themselves, and that encouraged me to do a lot of things in my house. That was really nice. But there is a lot of personal freedom, to an extent where, even if you want to go on a lunch for your parents, you have to take an appointment versus the culture I'm coming from, you just show up at the door.
Oh, you know what? You're right. Like we overschedule things sometimes, even like to hang out with friends. I mean, we have to schedule a hangout 3 weeks to 3 months in advance. You're so right.
Yeah, totally. But there are, one of the other things, I observed was a diversity, right? In US is incredibly, diverse country, I'll tell you. I mean, there's so many different culture and, immigrants, they live here and they all live in a same harmony. I mean, people talk about racism a lot here, but I would say I've been to a lot of countries. I stayed there and, I would say US is one of the least racist country.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of inclusiveness in a workspace too. I see a lot of people from different culture. They work together here. I mean, I haven't seen any other country that this is that diversified.
Huh. Okay, that makes me feel better because sometimes it's easy to get caught up in either personal experiences or the news, and I do feel there is a lot of racism here in the U.S. But hearing it from a different perspective, it's like okay. There's hope.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing about when I came to the States. That was a funny thing. Everything is an option. I went to local daily. I remember that. So the server goes like, okay, sure. What kind of sandwich would you like? And I was like, I'll just have some vegetarian sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes like, okay, what kind of bread?
Oh.
So I was like, well, we only have one kind of bread. I have only seen one kind of bread in India.
You're like regular?
Yeah. So he's like, oh, we have 7 options here. We have white bread, brown bread, and then 7 grains and herbs and cheese. I was like, okay, hold on. We have 7 kind of different breads. And that's not done, and then there's an option for everything while you make a sandwich. That was, even buying a car. I remember when I went to buy a car with my cousin, he goes like, what kind of a car? I was like, okay, I thought there are only 2 or 3 kind of brands usually.
All the features.
That's what it is. Yeah. It's like, no, you want American car? Let's start there. American, German, kind of Korean, Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Then, there is a lot of variety in that too. I was like, okay, so everything is an option here.
Such an interesting, you're right. Cause like even I usually associate that with like trying to get a coffee or at Starbucks, right? You look at the size and then the caffeine intake, how many espresso shots and whatever. But I didn't realize that really does parlay into almost everything we do is customizable.
Which is great, awesome. There's an option for everything. But that just make you think your choices are too big, that, you have to, it takes your time to make a decision.
And from an English perspective, it's so much pressure. I'm like, oh man, I just want a simple order.
Yeah, like if you go to India, let's say there is, a different kind of cuisines there. We just say that word, this is what you want. Yeah, you can customize it here and there, but they'll just, prep you. But here you have to have constant interaction with your server most of the time.
Yeah, you are so right. And then what about, I remember we had talked about the portions. Was that the portions in the US of how big the meals are? Is that something that took a while to get used to?
I was shocked. I was shocked when I looked at the size of the potato. I went for grocery shopping and, I remember my uncle told me, get a couple, one potato. I was like, 1 potato. Maybe he may just have mistaken, we were just planning to cook something that evening.
Yeah.
But the size of the potato is like this large. And in India, you can, kind of grab a couple like a tiny potatoes in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is just so big, the potato and the tomato and the cucumber. Like you can buy one piece and you'll be good if you are just cooking for yourself for a couple of days.
Oh, so even you notice a difference even in the size of the individual things.
Oh yeah, the size is kind of, the portions are pretty big.
Ah, America. So, from culture shocks to career challenges, can you tell me a little bit about some of the communication challenges that you faced speaking English in the workplace?
Initially, when I was just more working as an individual contributor, I felt I mean, my English is awesome and, it's good enough to do my day-to-day job.
Mhm.
But since I started my company, it's like running a business, you interact with, as I mentioned, sometimes you have to interact with your customers, your investors, and you have to grow your networking, right?
Mhm.
And what I started realizing is there were certain communication challenges, especially, my pronunciations, my vocabulary was limited, and it's limited even today. But when somebody said, "Hey, can you please repeat that?" or "Sorry, I didn't understand you," what I started
Confidence killer.
thinking exactly, what I started thinking is, "Oh, they didn't understand my accent, my pronunciation." Maybe that's the case, but maybe that's not the case as well. Maybe they didn't understand the subject itself. But that just kind of diminished my confidence, very easily. And I started thinking, okay, I need to sound more like American, right? So the whole accent bias,
Mm.
that kind of started losing my confidence. And also, things like when I started networking more, I realized that I have nothing else to talk outside of work, during my small talks and some of the cultural norms as well.
Yeah, like the boundaries or what's appropriate or inappropriate.
Exactly.
Especially as you're seeing, your career growth, the value of networking is huge. And I can imagine a lot of non-native speakers as they're growing in leadership positions, I find hold themselves back. That worry of like, I don't know what to talk about. I'm not really sure. I feel kind of awkward. And so I find that sometimes they don't engage in that really important networking and small talk. Having been through that, do you have any advice for someone who is in that phase of they want to grow their career, they want to meet more people, but they're feeling a little bit stuck or insecure?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the whole networking is big. Yeah, as you grow as a leader, yeah, be it in any field, right? Networking is very important. Some of the things which I learned and which I do now is, prepare yourself, about that particular event. What kind of networking event it is. Yeah, do some research. Who all are going to attend that, who is going to be speaker. So that will give you some, interesting topics to talk about. Those are some common interests you can pick up. But as I said, you can only talk about, your interest and your technology about, that particular event so long. You will, if you really want to connect somebody, you wanna connect at the personal level. If you don't prep yourself, how you connect at personal level, then yeah, you will run out of topics.
Mm.
So yeah, some of the things I've been preparing is a small talk. How to do some casual small talks and how to be more confident. And listening is amazing as well. Listen to them very carefully. I mean, you don't have to put like a lot of energy. Keep breathing. When somebody's talking, and that's something I learned through this program. Keep breathing. Otherwise, if you think that okay, what I'm gonna answer next, you're not listening to them, right? And you're
It's
not
so
breathing.
distracting. It's so hard to,
That is
to break that habit, though.
exactly. And your mind is tiring already. You're not breathing. You're not listening. You're thinking constantly what I'm gonna answer next. That's something it was really, really. I really appreciate you and this program. That helped me.
And then you're not yourself, right? Like you're so exhausted from lack of breathing, thinking, trying to listen, trying to balance all these things. From a physical level, you just kind of look like a robot. Not you, but anyone. And then you're exhausted. You have no personality. And then people don't get to connect with the real you.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of non-verbal listening skill, like, eye contact, nodding, all that, we went through in our deep dive sessions about it. That all, I would say goes a long way.
And something else that I really like that I would recommend for others as well to piggyback off of your advice. I love corporate jargon. Just circle back. So to piggyback on your advice, sometimes it's difficult to hear the advice of just talk about yourself or ask questions because from a non-native speaker perspective, that's the hardest thing you can tell someone to do. So to prepare, for example, I recommend like prepare 3 stories about yourself. First of all, triangle, get to the point, really concise. So think about things that you would normally share. For example, if you're married, how did you meet your spouse? Get that story kind of really sharpened and short, and have like 2 versions, a 1 sentence and maybe like a 5 sentence. Prepare those, practice those, and then practice the question you're going to ask. So then you can ask, what about you? Are you married? What about you? How did you meet your spouse? So having those little moments, if you have a child, prepare talking about your child, again, in a 1 sentence form and in a 5 sentence. So as you're doing these concise moments, when it comes up in conversation, you're not caught off guard, and then you feel like, oh, I couldn't talk about something so simple, and it kills your conversation confidence.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. Practicing is definitely important. Sometimes people would like to talk at the length, then practicing 5, 7, 6 things. Sometimes they are not, that they don't want to share certain things. Then you just move on. So that's definitely good advice.
And you can always figure out, usually you can guess what the first 5 questions are going to be. As soon as they hear where you're from, or if they hear an accent, they're going to ask you, oh, where are you from? So prepare how you describe your background. So that way you're not repeating your resume when it's just like a coffee at a conference. So you want to make sure you have a casual version of that.
Yeah.
Because we all fall into, I find with non-native speakers, it's almost, you fall into oversharing, and you say too much, when really the expectation for American small talk, it's like tennis, right? It's like a little bit, and then you just have to keep going back and forth. And that can be something that people then misperceive you as, like, I don't want to say boring, but might not want to hang around as much. And speaking of getting to the point, that does have a lot to do with the cultural norms and expectations that we have of storytelling, not just conversation. So can you tell me a little bit more about how that's impacted your own storytelling?
Absolutely. So understanding the culture norms was really important for me, and that has shaped, how I communicate now versus before, especially, after this program. So I'll give you some example. The one of the best thing I like, what I learned is the triangle storytelling approach. Right? Don't get into the details. Americans really appreciate if you get to the points directly. I'll give you, a couple examples that comes up in my conversations when I'm doing the networking. Like if somebody asked me, hey, how is your business doing? Then I would say, right now, I would say, oh, we're doing great. We have about X amount of revenue. Or I would say, oh yeah, we're doing great. We're just growing about 40% year over year, right? That's to the point. If that's how your business is doing. Versus before, I would say, oh, back in 2016, we were doing this, and what happened, this happened, and then, business was doing okay, and then suddenly things were started falling apart, and then I'll talk about 2024, that how it is doing right now. They're not interested, Exactly. So they are like, they're not interested. I mean, they may be, but if they're interested, they'll ask you, right? So, famously you say it once, tell me the time right now. Let's not get about building the clock. If I need to know how to build the clock, we'll build it together.
I love that quote. It's so powerful.
That has helped me even when I do my small talks with somebody. So even over there, the triangle approach and the cultural sensitivity, kind of both goes, together. This is very important. Another example I like about small talk, if somebody asks me, oh, how did you meet your wife? I used to usually say, oh, back in 2008, there was a concert in Nashville and common friends. Yeah, we attended. It's like, okay.
You're like, it was a sunny day.
Yeah. So I'm kind of, giving them your 2 hours a movie here. Versus, oh, I met through friends. Oh, I met through, tennis coaching program, right? We don't have to, get into the details. Yeah. So that understanding the triangle storytelling, understanding the sensitivity, the personal, all that helped me a lot. And my storytelling is very different now. And it's amazing. I love it.
And it applies both to personal conversations, like you were saying, and also, like we talked about, in your town halls or board meetings. And I think what can be challenging, because the triangle approach is awesome, but I think it's also important for non-native speakers to realize it's not just get to the point. A lot of times, like other cultures will do, an inverted triangle. You take the journey, you give the details. the bottom line is the way we communicate is to build trust. And so it can be a little bit jarring from a non-native speaker perspective, where getting to the point first might feel like, how am I building trust if I don't give you the full context? And so really embracing that, actually getting to the point in American culture builds trust because it shows transparency in a way. It's how we value, like if you give too many details or too much story, it almost gets a little bit like shady, right? Like why is he telling me all this? And so in your attempt to be transparent in the way that your culture shows it, in the journey and showing everything, it has the opposite impact. And so in terms of executive presence, where you think, oh, if the more I say, the more transparent they think I am. And that's really important, to be honest. Like we talked about our 3 pillars, and realizing, oh, the way I'm communicating is actually hurting the way people perceive me, and more importantly, the way people trust me. I think that's when you really appreciate, like, okay, I'm not changing who I am to be American. Like that's never the goal, but rather, how can I be more trustworthy? How can I communicate in a way that I show them what I really want them to see? Which in this case for us, transparency is getting to the point. Honesty is getting to the point, but also being open to details.
Totally. Like, the point here is not to share so many details like you don't want to. It's like, let it be a tennis, just tell them something, share something, and they'll ask you right questions. I think what happens is, with a lot of non-English speakers, they think, let me tell all the details up front, right? And let me impress somebody. Let me, it's kind of also internally, that you think that you don't have that much of confidence or something, right? And then you try to get everything up front, and you're trying too hard. Just be natural, and then build that trust naturally, and then
You're so
that
right.
helps.
Because you do, and I think it goes beyond, whereas other people might feel like they have to impress because of the position. It's really about, I find for non-native speakers, it's trying to impress that you have enough English. There's always, I think, a sense of trying to prove yourself, of like,
Oh yeah.
I have enough English to be here kind of thing. And I think that, especially when you're in big meetings or you see other people presenting and you think, oh, I wish I could speak like that person, or I don't know if I'm expressing myself like this other person. And just, as you know, like just trust. Simplicity and clarity will impress people so much more. Using real like emotional language is so much more impressive to connect versus, these like amazing, very like eloquent words and being verbose and all of that. It's not going to do it.
Absolutely.
So the final question for today is about all of the work that you've done for your leadership communication. So part of the program that we've done together is taking you to that next level. And so I'm curious to hear from you, what has been the most helpful or the most transformative thing that you've learned throughout our time together?
So with this program, I tell you, it was very well structured. Initially, I thought, I need to sound more like an American. That is how only I'm going to gain the confidence, right? I need to pronounce like them. I need to have the great vocabulary. But you know what? No, you know enough English. So building that confidence for me was a game changer, right? The most important thing I learned is maintaining your executive presence, first of all, right? If you're walking into a meeting, if you're meeting your client, if you're meeting somebody first time, introduce yourself. Keep it very simple. Introduce yourself with eye to eye and very confidently. And as soon as you have that great start, you're setting the whole tone for the whole meeting, right? So maintaining that executive presence was really important for me, and realizing that no, the goal is not to sound like an American. The goal is, you know enough English. You just need to work on, I just needed to work on the storytelling. And speaking of that, storytelling, we talked about that, the triangle storytelling approach. Oh my God, that's like every other meeting I walk into, that is what I'm supposed to do at this point, right? I have a town hall, every month, and I'm only given 5 to 7 minutes to talk about what my department is doing it. So if I start going into, again, the detail, then people will start texting and doing something else. They're not interested, how I build it, what I build it, tell me what I'm getting. And that also helps me, to relate with my audience, right? So another thing I learned, how to present, how to talk, to your audience. You have to understand your audience. If it is a technical audience, if it is a technical conference, yes, go to, you may want to start talking in terms of technology. But many times, most of the times you are talking to non-technical people because they are your customer. That is where, you're selling your product. Telling somebody, in a layman terms, that was another learning for me. Understand your audience, who you are, what are you selling, who are you selling, that will keep your audience, very engaged. And also a couple of the things on the personal side, I learned through this program is maintaining your anxiety. Yes, realize, you are anxious. I mean, it could happen time to time. The best part I like is the 3-step thing, kind of blood circulations, breathing is so important, and, your posture is also very important. Something we learned called DMS, drink, move, sing, anything you like, drink something you like, maybe dance or move before the meetings, loosen up, think about your success song, all that, those are confidence boosters.
Which I do myself as well.
I mean, all these things, kind of help me to build my leadership and my communication style. Again, it's not all about the English. Yeah, you may want to practice certain words, certain things about your domain, but you don't want to be an Oxford dictionary expert here. You'll never encounter so many words, right? So be simple, but understanding, all this different aspect of communication was really important. And this program has taught me all of that. So I really appreciate everything we went through.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being so open with us and sharing your experiences.
No, thank you so much, Tanya, for having me here. And really, appreciate all your feedback, inputs, and the wonderful program we went through. There was amazing learnings.
And remember to check the episode notes to connect with Mishit on LinkedIn and learn more about being a leader in tech. And remember to like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know who else you would like me to interview to learn about their leadership English journey.